In America, kids don't roam the streets anymore. No bikes scattered on sidewalks, no games of tag in the cul-de-sac. If childhood had a sound, it's gone quiet. Childhood is being taken. It's all because of the screens, right? No, the real reasons run deeper. And if we don't figure out what's happening, we risk raising kids who've never truly lived childhood at all. So what killed childhood? And more importantly, can we bring it back? There was a time when kids ruled the streets. They rode bikes to the corner store, climbed trees in the empty lot down the block, and stayed out until the streetlights buzzed to life. Parents worried, of course, but they trusted that their neighborhoods were safe enough to let childhood happen. That trust is gone. Today, American children spend an average of just 7 minutes a day playing outside alone. 7 minutes. And it's not because they don't want to be out there. It's because the world feels more dangerous than ever. Ask any parent why their child stays inside, and the answer is almost always the same: safety. And who can blame them? Every news cycle is packed with worst-case scenarios. Kidnappings, missing child alerts, assaults spread like wildfire online. It only takes one terrifying headline to make a parent tighten their grip. And honestly, who wouldn't? But here's the strange part. Crime rates in many suburban areas have actually dropped. In the last decade alone, violent crime in U.S. neighborhoods has fallen by 15%. On paper, kids today are safer than their parents were at the same age. So why does it feel like the opposite? Because fear isn't driven by statistics. It's driven by perception. A single kidnapping can dominate national news within hours, flooding social media feeds and amplifying the illusion that danger is everywhere. And once fear takes hold, it spreads. A grandmother from an online parenting group put it simply: "When I was raising my kids, we let them walk to the park. Now, I won't let my grandson out of my sight when he's outside." From giving kids independence to keeping them under constant watch, that shift has reshaped childhood itself. But it's not just crime. The environment itself has changed. In many neighborhoods, streets once safe for play are now clogged with cars, rideshare drivers, and delivery vans. Traffic has skyrocketed, in some areas by more than 30% in just 5 years. Tom Smith, a father in Albany, remembers when kids filled his street, skateboarding and playing ball. Now he says, then came the rise in delivery drivers, the worst offenders for speeding. Now the idea of children being out on this street is sadly inconceivable. The most ironic part? Keeping kids indoors may actually make neighborhoods less safe. Urban expert Jane Jacobs argued that the safest streets aren't the ones that are empty, they're the ones that are full of life. When kids are outside, neighbors notice them. When parents chat on front porches, there are more eyes on the street. Empty sidewalks create a cycle of fear. The fewer kids play outside, the more dangerous it seems to let them. And while parents do everything they can to protect childhood by keeping kids inside, what if keeping kids inside isn't as safe as we think? We'll uncover this later on. Not long ago, stepping outside meant endless possibilities. A game of hide-and-seek in the empty lot, biking to a friend's house, climbing a tree just to see who could get the highest. Kids didn't need a plan, they just went outside. Now, that freedom is disappearing. The open spaces where childhood once thrived are vanishing, swallowed by concrete and congestion. Empty lots are now parking structures. Neighborhood parks are fenced off, underfunded, or simply replaced with something more useful. Backyards, once the center of childhood adventure, have shrunk to tiny patches of grass or disappeared altogether. For many families, playing outside doesn't mean stepping out the door. It means getting in the car and driving somewhere, and that's if there's even a safe place to go. Parents today rely on public parks more than ever, but those spaces aren't always nearby or welcoming. In too many neighborhoods, playgrounds are neglected, with broken swings, cracked pavement, and graffiti-covered slides. Some parks feel unsafe, not because of crime statistics, but because they're poorly lit, unmaintained, and largely abandoned. It's even worse in lower-income areas, where funding for public spaces is often an afterthought. But it's not just a lack of parks, it's the way cities are designed. Decades ago, suburban planning revolved around families. Cul-de-sacs for safe bike riding, sidewalks wide enough for strollers and scooters, green spaces within walking distance. Today, urban development is about profit, not play. Housing density takes priority, with developers cramming as many homes as possible into each block. Major roads slice through once quiet neighborhoods, creating dangerous crossings between kids and the few remaining places they're supposed to play. Urban planners are starting to recognize the problem. As education professor Ruslan Slutsky puts it, if we want kids to be outside playing, we need to have spaces for them to do that. Contrast this with the Netherlands, where urban planning revolves around children's independence. Dutch kids regularly bike miles to school on protected cycling paths, navigating their cities without parents hovering nearby. Meanwhile, in the US, only 13% of children walk or bike to school, a drastic drop from nearly 50% just a few decades ago. And the impact is clear. Over 60% of American children who play outside never stray more than 10 miles from home. But what happens when there's nothing to explore within that radius? They stay inside. They turn to screens. They grow up disconnected from the world beyond their front door. Some communities are beginning to rethink what childhood should look like. Cities like San Francisco and Seattle are experimenting with parklets, transforming tiny unused spaces into mini green areas. In Philadelphia, schools are redesigning their playgrounds to double as community parks, giving families a place to gather, even after school hours. Other cities are converting vacant lots into playgrounds and community gardens, creating spaces where kids can play without waiting for an adult to drive them somewhere. It won't change overnight, but if we start designing neighborhoods for kids again, we might just bring childhood back. And yet, even in the places where space does exist, something else is missing, something that once made childhood feel truly alive. A child sits inside, scrolling through a screen, not because they want to, but because there's no one outside to play with. Playdates are penciled into calendars. Parents send texts to coordinate an hour at the park. Spontaneous fun, the kind where kids just run out the door and see who's around, has become a thing of the past. One mother put it bluntly, "When I was a kid, we had a whole crew on the block. Now, my daughter only has her tablet for company because there's no one around her age to play with." Poppy, who grew up in Chesterbrook, remembers when kids on her street were like an extended family. They'd grab their chalk, kick a football around, and turn the neighborhood into their personal playground. But now, we could hear the children playing in their back gardens, squealing with delight on their trampolines, but we never saw them. And it's not just a coincidence. Families are more isolated than ever. Many parents don't know their neighbors well enough to feel comfortable letting their kids roam. A national survey found that 68% of parents will only allow outdoor play if a trusted adult is present. Poppy adds, "Now play dates have to be arranged in advance between adults. I can't say go out and play, like my parents said to my sister and me. With who? Where?" Instead of running outside to find friends, kids are shuttled between structured activities, soccer practice, dance class, tutoring. Every hour accounted for, every interaction monitored. The result? Less creativity, less problem solving, less time to just be kids. It's changing childhood. Losing community play has serious consequences. Increased loneliness and anxiety among kids are tied to this lack of connection. Unstructured play enhances physical health through movement, develops social skills through peer interaction, and fosters creativity and problem-solving abilities. It teaches skills that are hard to replicate in structured environments or online interactions. But how do you bring something back when it's already disappeared? Because kids aren't just losing playtime, they're losing time itself. And the reason why? Packed schedules. A child rushes from school to practice, from practice to tutoring, from tutoring to homework. Every hour accounted for, every minute planned. By the time dinner is over, there's just one thing left: bedtime. For most kids, there's just no time. A parent shared online. My 10-year-old spends 6 days a week in structured sports activities. There's no room for anything else, and this story isn't unique. Across the United States, parents are enrolling their kids in more extracurricular activities than ever. But that edge comes at a cost, at the expense of unstructured outdoor play. It's not just sports either. Academic pressure is relentless. Parents worry that if their kids aren't constantly learning, they'll fall behind, so tutoring replaces playtime. Enrichment programs take priority over free afternoons. Childhood turns into a checklist of things to accomplish instead of experiences to enjoy. This constant structure takes a toll. A physical education expert put it simply: when kids have every moment planned for them, they lose the ability to entertain themselves. The second they have downtime, they don't know what to do with it. Screens become the default, not because kids are obsessed with technology, but because they've never been given the space to create their own fun. Research backs this up. Swiss researchers compared two groups: children with free neighborhood play versus those with supervised park time. The free play group doubled their outdoor time, had twice as many friends, and developed stronger social and motor skills. Yet, today's reality is different. The average American child now spends less than an hour a day playing outside, just 5 hours a week. And the worst part? Many families feel trapped. Suburban life makes spontaneous play nearly impossible. Kids can't just walk or bike to activities anymore. Parents have to drive them everywhere. As one dad put it, the irony is, we're doing this to give them opportunities, but we're also taking away the simple joy of just playing. But it's not just kids feeling the weight of packed schedules. Parents are exhausted too. Nearly 70% of parents admit they feel guilty about how little time they spend outdoors with their kids. Some families are fighting back. The slow parenting movement is gaining momentum, encouraging parents to step off the treadmill of constant scheduling and bring back unstructured time. Even schools are recognizing the issue. One teacher assigned weekend homework that simply said, "Go play outside." Because the solution isn't eliminating structure entirely. Sports, music, and learning matter. But so does the space to just be a kid. Because when every moment is planned, there is no childhood anymore. And as packed as kids' schedules have become, there's one more problem. Parents are just as overwhelmed. By the time a working parent gets home, the day is already spoken for. There's dinner to make, homework to check, emails to skim through. The clock moves too fast, and exhaustion sets in before the thought of getting outside even crosses their mind. And yet, the guilt lingers. One mother put it simply, "It's not that I don't want my kids to go outside, but after an 8-hour shift and a long commute, I'm just too tired to supervise." For many families, this is an everyday reality. According to 2016 U.S. Census reports, nearly a quarter of all kids live in a single-parent home. More than 60% of those living in two-parent homes have both parents working. It's not just exhaustion that keeps kids indoors. Instead, supervision is one of the biggest barriers. When time is already stretched thin, finding an extra hour to watch kids play feels impossible. And neighborhoods aren't making it any easier. As we discussed earlier, parks and playgrounds are often too far to reach on foot. In many areas, just getting to a place where kids can play requires a car ride, a scheduled drop-off, and a parent willing to stay and supervise. For working families, that level of involvement is just unrealistic. The mental toll is just as heavy. It's crushing. Many parents admit to feeling guilty about how little time they spend outdoors with their kids. A survey even found that 35% of parents encourage outdoor play just so they can have a moment of quiet. Even with these challenges, some parents are finding ways to bring outdoor play back. Ginny Urich, founder of the 1,000 Hours Outside movement, started the initiative after realizing how trapped her own family had become indoors. She explained, "It didn't come naturally at first, but once we made it a habit, we all felt happier, less stressed, and more connected. But this isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal one. Longer work hours, longer commutes, less time for leisure. Parents today aren't just stretched thin, they're pushed to the limit. And yet, parents are finding new solutions. Some communities are rethinking outdoor play altogether. Parents are forming co-ops, taking turns supervising groups of kids instead of carrying the burden alone. Others are pushing for better urban design, more accessible parks, safer streets, and play areas where kids don't need constant oversight. Because the truth is, parents want their kids to have the same freedoms they once did, but modern life makes it a struggle. Childhood isn't something you can put on hold. Once it's gone, it doesn't come back. You can't turn back time. You can't bring back the world where kids roamed freely from sunrise to sunset. But you can decide what childhood looks like today. Children need freedom, exploration, connection. That hasn't changed. What's changed is the world around them. And if we don't fight for those things, who will? It's not always easy. Safe places to play are disappearing. Time feels stretched too thin. Letting kids roam unsupervised isn't as simple as it used to be. But that doesn't mean childhood has to shrink into 4 walls and a screen. Maybe it starts small. Say yes to an extra 10 minutes outside. Swap one scheduled activity for unstructured play. Meet a neighbor to build a shared space for kids to gather. Maybe push for better parks, safer streets, and cities that put children first again. Because these moments are the kind of joy that doesn't come from a screen. In a world that never stops moving, one thing remains constant. Your presence is the greatest gift you can give. And one day, when they look back on their childhood, it won't be the structured schedules they remember. It'll be the moments you fought to make possible.